On the morning of March 12, 1932, a maid let herself into an apartment in Paris and found one of the richest men in the world lying on his bed, fully dressed, hands folded over a bullet hole in his chest. On the nightstand sat a pistol he had bought 2 hours earlier. His name was Ivar Kreuger, and at that moment he controlled 3/4 of the matches on planet Earth. He had lent more money than entire governments held. He was worth on paper billions. The problem was that last word, paper. Because within days the world would discover that the greatest fortune of the age was a lie so enormous it would force nations to rewrite the laws of money themselves. Presidents had trusted this man. The smartest bankers alive had begged to lend to him. Your great-grandparents may have owned a piece of him. And today, almost no one knows his name. This is the story of how one quiet Swedish engineer fooled the entire world, and how all of it, every last match, turned to ash. This is the story of Ivar Kreuger, the Match King. He did not start with money. He started with ambition and a talent for telling people exactly what they wanted to hear. Ivar Kreuger was born in Sweden in 1880, the son of a small match manufacturer in a quiet town. Bright, restless, and bored, he trained as an engineer. And then he left. He chased work across America, South Africa, anywhere they were building. He sold steel. He built bridges. He learned the one skill that would define his life: how to make something look more impressive than it was. In New York, he learned a new American technique, reinforced concrete, and brought it back to Sweden. With a partner, he started a construction firm, and he made it famous with a single promise no one else dared to make: finish on time or pay the penalty yourself. He built Stockholm's stadium. He built landmarks. By his 30s, Ivar Kreuger was a wealthy, respected builder. It wasn't enough. It was never going to be enough. Because Kreuger had noticed something about his father's dull little business, the matches that everyone else had missed. A match is almost worthless. It costs a fraction of a cent. There is no glamour in it, no genius. And that, Kreuger realized, was exactly the point. Everyone needed matches. Every single day, in every country, forever. It was small, constant, invisible demand. And if one man could control the supply, all of it, he would own a tiny tax on daily life across the entire world. So he began buying up match factories, first in Sweden. Then he turned the Swedish makers into one giant company and pointed it outward at the world. But factories weren't the real weapon. The real weapon was timing. The Great War had just ended. Europe was shattered. Governments were broke, desperate, drowning in debt, and no one would lend to them. And Ivar Kreuger walked into that desperation holding a checkbook. His offer was simple and irresistible. I will lend your ruined country millions of dollars, cheaper than anyone. No strings except one. You give me a monopoly, the exclusive right to sell every match in your nation. For a desperate finance minister, it was easy money. For Kreuger, it was an empire. Country by country, the deals spread. France, Germany, Poland, Greece, Hungary, Romania, one government after another signed away its matches for Kreuger's cash. At its peak, his empire stretched across as many as 15 nations and controlled roughly 2/3 to 3/4 of all match production on Earth. He was no longer a businessman. He was a one-man international monetary fund, lending to nations from his own private fortune. World leaders treated him as a peer. He kept apartments in the great capitals, a palace of an office in Stockholm with secret buttons and phones that rang to no one. Props to make visitors feel they were in the presence of power. But an empire that size runs on one thing: cash. Constant, enormous rivers of cash to fund the next loan, to win the next monopoly. Kreuger didn't have that kind of money. No one did. So he did something audacious. He decided to get it from the public. Kreuger turned to investors, especially in America, and he sold them paper, shares, and bonds in his companies. And to make that paper irresistible, he promised something almost no one else could: enormous, reliable dividends. Year after year, around 20%, sometimes more. Money flooded in. hundreds of millions of dollars from ordinary people and giant banks alike, all of them desperate to own a piece of the genius who never seemed to lose. There was just one problem. The profits weren't real. Kreuger's match monopolies made money, but nowhere near enough to pay the dividends he had promised. So he paid the old investors using the money pouring in from the new ones. A fortune that looked like a waterfall of profit was, underneath, simply a bucket being passed from one hand to the next. To hide the hole, he built a labyrinth, as many as 400 separate companies, shuffling money between them so no auditor could ever follow the trail. He kept the real books in his own head. And when even that wasn't enough, he committed the act that would damn him. He forged government bonds, tens of millions of dollars in fake Italian treasury bonds, complete with forged signatures of Italian officials, which he listed as real assets. On paper, Ivar Kreuger was one of the richest men in the world. On paper, the fortune was made of paper, and paper burns. For a while, the illusion held. As long as new money kept flowing in, the machine kept turning, and no one looked too closely at the man who seemed to print gold. Then, in 1929, the market crashed. The rivers of new investment dried up overnight, and Kreuger's machine, the one that survived only by swallowing fresh cash every single day, began to starve. He did what he had always done. He kept up appearances. He borrowed in secret to pay dividends in public. He told banks his empire was solid, his assets enormous, his books impeccable. He even arranged new loans by offering, as collateral, the forged Italian bonds, pledging fake assets to borrow real money to cover earlier lies. But the hole was now too large to fill. Bankers in America and Sweden started asking the one question Kreuger could never survive: show us the cash. In March 1932, they summoned him to Paris to prove his fortune was real. He knew he couldn't. Which brings us back to that apartment in Paris. On the morning of March 12, 1932, hours before a meeting that would have exposed everything, Ivar Kreuger went out, bought a pistol, returned to his room, lay down on his bed, and shot himself through the heart. He left a note: "I have made such a mess of things that I believe this to be the best solution for all concerned." When the auditors finally opened his books, the world reeled. The man hailed as the savior of Europe had falsified hundreds of millions of dollars in assets, the fake bonds, the phantom profits, the 400 shell companies. It is still remembered as one of the largest financial frauds in history, the Kreuger crash. Fortunes evaporated. Ordinary families who had trusted the genius lost everything. The shock was so deep that it helped change the world. In its wake, the United States built the modern rules of finance, independent audits, real disclosure, the laws that created the Securities and Exchange Commission. Much of the financial honesty we now take for granted exists, in part, because one Swedish man proved how easily honesty could be faked. And Kreuger himself, he simply vanished from memory. No statues, no legend. The richest illusion of his age struck once, burned bright, and went out. Every empire in this series starts the same way, with nothing, and most of them end the same way too. This is Rags to Riches, the rise and the fall of the world's greatest fortunes. If you want to know who's next, subscribe. The following ones built even bigger and fell even harder.